Great. Welcome, everyone.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome. We would like to know where you're joining from, so feel free to put in the chat where you're joining from and your name and any questions you have for Beth. Beth, can I go ahead and introduce you?
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
If we could mute ourselves, it would be wonderful. It would be wonderful to thank you. Thank you so much. So we don't have any additional noise to that. So thank you so much. So we should start. Yes, Beth, we want to thank you first of all for this very, very different webinar today. We are really grateful for having your voice, your experience and your learnings from a personal journey this time. Awareness and advocacy, supporting learners diagnosed with life-changing health conditions like type 1 diabetes. And you will help us understand what was this learning, what was the journey and experience was that for you and for your family and for your son. Beth Stark is an educational consultant specializing in UDL implementation and inclusionary practices for international schools. Her passion for reducing barriers through systematic design and centering accessibility began during her years as a teacher for learners who are blind and visually impaired. She spent 16 years as an IB Learning Support Coordinator and is the mother of 2 children, one of whom was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in April of 2022. And we were together back then, Beth, if I remember that. Beth serves as the Co-Chairperson of the UDL-IRN Implementation Special Interest Group at ECIS. It partners with international schools around the world to build awareness, readiness, and capacity for creating the conditions for expert learning. So the virtual stage is for you, and thank you so much, Beth.
Oh, Eleni, thank you so much for that warm welcome. And thank you to everyone at ECIS for being so receptive and supportive about hosting this very different webinar. I'm coming to you as a fellow educator. I spent 16 years as an IB secondary school learning support coordinator. And I'm also coming to you as a parent of a child who, as Eleni shared, was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes last year. And before we begin, I would like to encourage everyone to access the SMORE website that I have built to support our webinar journey today. And I want to assure everyone that that website, which I'm going to often refer to as the SMORE, because that is the name of the platform that I used, SMORE, is going to stay up and running. So I want it to be a source of support and link other people in the international ed community to resources that will help other learners, hopefully. So please take a moment to either scan the QR code or click on the hot link that is shared in the chat so that we can take this journey together in our hour of time together today. So as Eleni mentioned, we started this journey together. Over a year ago, I had my heart set on being a dedicated member of the Inclusive Education Special Interest Group at ECIS. And I began my role as a member, and very quickly, shortly after my son was diagnosed, I had to make the tough decision to really reduce my responsibilities. And 6 months later, after so much learning and so much, to be quite honest, struggle, you know, I was able to really put things in perspective and realize that there is so much that I didn't know that I wanted to make sure was available to others. And so here we are. We're going to be learning not about the ins and outs of type 1 diabetes and how to care for it, but as fellow educators and parents and caregivers quite often of learners and young people who are diagnosed with life-changing health conditions, I'd like to focus on 3 dimensions that will help and guide us to empowering them and making sure that what happens to them does not necessarily dictate the way that they see themselves, and instead informs how they see themselves. So those three dimensions we are going to cover today are empowering through multiple means of expression. I also want to focus on centering identity and embracing that identity post-diagnosis and fostering an advocacy mindset. So I'm sure all of this sounds familiar, but we're going to be looking at it through the lens of a young person who's diagnosed and as a family member, because that's my primary perspective. So I want to start by telling you about my story and my son's story. It was a really sudden change. We do not have any history of type 1 diabetes in our family, neither myself nor my husband. And our whole family had gone through a bout of COVID in late March of 2022. And as anyone who has had COVID knows, it affects each person in very different ways. And so about 10 days post-quarantine, I made the decision early morning to take my son to the pediatrician. And in the days leading up to that decision, there were some really unusual things that happened that we spent a lot of time ignoring. And for example, my son seemed to be incredibly thirsty all the time. And of course, we attributed that to him recovering from COVID. He was tired. Again, he was recovering from COVID. And he also seemed to be very hungry. And of course, we had the idea that he was going through a growth spurt and he was recovering from COVID where he hadn't eaten very much and his body was just needing more nutrients. The reason that I woke up that morning and decided to go to the doctor was because he had also started to wet the bed. And this was incredibly unusual. He had not done so since he was a toddler. And there was something down deep inside of me that said that this was too far out of the ordinary and that it needed to be addressed. Even still, I was doubting myself. And when I went into the pediatrician's office, I was apologetic with the nurses. I said, I feel like a helicopter mom. I'm really sorry. Something's just not right. And I'm not sure what it is. And they reassured me and said, no problem. We'll just do a quick test to see how things are going. And things changed very quickly after that test. That urine test was followed up with a blood test by pricking his finger. And the doctor quickly came into the room, was already on the phone with our general hospital, organizing for his admittance ASAP. And that was followed by a frantic trip to the hospital where we stayed for almost 2 weeks with my son. And my son's name is Artur. We won't be showing his image during the webinar, but we've all agreed to share his first name. And he's very excited and proud that I'm sharing with everyone today. So during those almost 2 weeks in the hospital, we all as a family took a crash course on diabetes care, insulin injections, how to measure out food, weigh it, and then calculate the amount of insulin that he had to take before every meal. Our nights were full of alarms and beeps because his insulin levels had dropped, or his glucose levels had dropped too low. And so he would have to take sugar tablets, glucose tablets, or apple juice. There was no good sleep. Definitely, that was an issue that had started to take a toll on both of us. But more so, it was the confusion about how all that we were learning was going to translate into our everyday lives once we returned home. I'm really grateful and happy to say that we got incredibly high quality care, which is not available to everyone in the world. But the emotional toll and the cognitive overload of having to learn so much was far greater than anything I could compare it to in my life. I had 2 babies under 2 years of age. I went back to work with a toddler and a small baby. years prior, and it was a breeze compared to this season of our lives. But we did get home, and we did have a successful stay. He was able to stabilize his blood sugars. We did learn a lot, and we were ready to be launched. We go to our endocrinologist 4 times a year. We were sent home with a continuous glucose monitor, 2 insulin pens, told to buy a scale, told to write everything down, and we went from there. During that time, as parents, we felt so overwhelmed by all that we needed to learn. We also wanted to, of course, take care of Artur's brother, Hugo, who was a little bit lost, of course, in the mix and the confusion and the strong emotions. And it would have been very easy to do what made me feel safest, which is research, learn more, develop my capacity as a caregiver and a parent of a child with type 1 diabetes. And although I did plenty of that, I also made a concerted effort to focus in on Artur's ability to express his emotions. You know, as a person who thinks out loud and quite often feels out loud and loves to write, the first thing that I tried to do, and as well as my husband, was to talk to Artur, to encourage him to engage in conversations about his big emotions. And also I went out right away and bought him a journal because he loves to write. And I assumed that that would be a great outlet for him. I want to just say that it's very important to provide options, because how I deal with big emotions is not the same as my child's. And he wasn't interested in writing down his emotions. And he oftentimes wasn't interested in talking about them either. And instead of feeling a sense of panic, I really stepped back and allowed him to be self-directed. And I really tried to develop more options for him so that he would have a chance to express himself in a way that made sense to him. And prior to being diagnosed with type 1, I would have said that Artur was a child who enjoyed drawing, but it didn't play a big role in his life. And since he's been diagnosed, he would now call himself an artist, and he really sees art as a key part of who he is and how he lives his life. So some children might really benefit from journaling. Some children will really love to play sports. Giving opportunities for different types of creative projects as well is really important. And the goal being that during all of these options being presented, that you're supporting the child, whether it's your student or your child, in finding an activity or a combination of activities that helps them to feel a sense of flow and a sense of sanctuary and safety within themselves. And luckily, after a lot of surveying and experimenting and trying lots of different new things, Artur found his mix, and that was art. And since his diagnosis, he does a lot less reading of books off the shelf. And instead, Artur really loves to listen to audiobooks and at the same time draw. And we can see that this is something that really gives him a deep sense of safety. He's very proud of how he's developed as an artist in the past, I would say, year or so, 10 months or so. And we're so grateful that he has found this formula that gives him so much security and a sense of confidence. When you are shocked in your life by a diagnosis and you have to worry and think about something like type 1 diabetes every day and all day, being able to step away and have a safe escape where you can express yourself is so, so important. as well as expression, it's important, being the adults in the lives of these children, that we model emotional literacy. And at first, I want to admit that something I did quite often was I would interview for pain. I would ask Artur, oh, that must be so hard. Do you want to talk about how that makes you feel? And so posing questions like that oftentimes made him feel perhaps a little shut down. And what I chose to start focusing on instead was modeling emotional literacy skills. So instead of interviewing him and trying to get him to be more conversational about his emotions, which was really probably pretty short-sighted on my part in the beginning, I shifted to modeling emotional literacy skills. So I want to bring everyone's attention to this more and just let you know that this emotions wheel with an accessible list of words is available there for you to download. Something that worked really well for my husband and I is when we talked to him about the way his art made us feel, we tried very hard to use a lot of language that described subtleties in different emotions so that he could really see that he was really touching our hearts through his creativity, and that art was not just about him expressing his emotions, but that he was really also making us feel big feelings as well. And that really allowed us to feel connected to him on a deeper level. And instead of expecting him to always use the prescribed language that we thought was appropriate, we just let him know that, what he was doing was making us have specific feelings and emotions. He would often ask us as well, what does that mean? What does it mean when you're feeling a sense of delight, or for example, and so it was a great way to expand his vocabulary. It's really awkward when you have a neighbor, a coworker, someone you perhaps haven't seen in a long time, or someone that you're leading as a leader in an organization, whose family member or themselves have been diagnosed with a life-changing health condition. Unlike certain diseases that you're fighting to eradicate, this is a lifelong circumstance. It's not going away. So there really is no fight to be had. Although I would consider Artur a diabetes warrior, and I tell him so. It's a difficult thing to find the right words to convey how you're feeling or your support of that person. A few things that felt a bit confusing to Artur sometimes, or that people would often minimize what was going on. They would say, well, technology these days, it's so much easier than it used to be. And of course, that's true. It is much easier, thank goodness. And my heart goes out to all of the people who are raising children 30 or 40 years ago with type 1 diabetes. I can only imagine how complicated it was without a continuous glucose monitor, for example. But we all know that comparative struggle, especially with children, it simply doesn't help to quell our big emotions. Another thing that people would oftentimes say, because they simply didn't know what to say, is that they're going to find a cure soon. And we all hope that's true, but we were struggling to support Artur in accepting his diagnosis. So becoming fascinated with the idea of a cure being right around the corner quite often led to confusion for him as a 7-year-old. And so we know that everyone was coming from a place of the best of intentions, and we would talk about that with him as well. But these are just a few different ways that you can talk to your coworkers or a younger person, perhaps with a different, playing around with the wording, to really invite a larger conversation. When people would ask, Artur, what's something that, you learned about type 1 now that you're a type 1 diabetic, or what's something that people don't understand? He would be his face would light up and he would be immediately engaged. Because there are so many misconceptions, and certainly we had a lot of misconceptions about type 1 before he was diagnosed. So that was a wonderful way to engage him. I started off this conversation sharing that when I, as the mother sleeping in the cot next to him, when I received this news and the months following, I was completely overwhelmed. I always prided myself on my work ethic and being a high functioner. And, remembering back to coming back to school after having, a baby and a toddler that I have to take care of and doing my job to the best of my ability. Post-diagnosis, I was completely overwhelmed. And I want to just take a moment to acknowledge the team that I worked with and how incredibly gracious and thoughtful they were. And one thing I would highly recommend to anyone would be to anticipate need and try to find ways to simply offer to do things for people. Because I was also sleep deprived because of so many alarms going on. So just knowing that I wasn't going to be able to get to all of the tasks and the emails, and having someone to say, I'm going to take this on for you right now. That's such a helpful thing to do. If you ask, what can I do for you at that time, it would have been too confusing at some days for me to evaluate what I could have handed over. So it's always nice to offer something very specific, a sharp end task that you can take off the plate of someone while they're adjusting. All right, so we're going to move on now, and we're going to talk a little bit about centering identity. And I want to say that there are kind of two camps about this topic. There's a lot of people in the world of type 1 diabetes that says diabetes does not define me. We were very intentional about making sure that Artur could integrate being a type 1 diabetic into his identity. And we started by modeling that as a family. And I would say from day one, we would talk about ourselves as a type 1 family, that we were a type 1 family now. And that he wasn't alone, but also that it had shifted our identity as a unit, as a family. And so I think that may have made things a little bit smoother, but there were a lot of other things that we tried to focus on in order to support this aspect of his journey. So sharing his story was an important piece of the puzzle. And when we were in the hospital, we began, really starting to think about, okay, what's your story? What do you want people in your class to know? What would you like to share with grandma and grandpa? And so I just opened up a Google slide presentation, and he just started telling me, and I started just taking notes, and then he would read it over. And what it turned out to be was a very short presentation. We didn't talk about when or how he would present it, but it was important to start crafting his story and getting it down on paper. This is actually one of the only pictures of him in the hospital smiling because we were in the hospital during Easter, and the Easter bunny came, and he was really excited. And so that story that we started crafting in the hospital, he did decide to share the first day that he was back in school. But I would not have pressured him to do so. I think it's very important to provide options. And one of those options can also be to allow it to stay in written form, or to allow learners to record themselves and to choose when they share that video recording, or to ask them what they would like to do. The idea is not to create it for others. The idea is to document the child's story for themselves. And when he saw his ideas and his journey on the screen, he did feel a real sense of confidence about that. I also want to point out right now that on the s'more, that you'll hear me refer to quite often, there's a link to a book creator template. And Book Creator is an amazing platform that you can access for free if you create a subscription, and you can remix that template and use it as a way for multiple means of expression so that your child or your learner can be as self-directed as possible with creating their own audio recordings or taking pictures and inserting those pictures into that template so they can start crafting their story on their own. Another thing that we really kind of worked at is trying to figure out who he could develop a connection with that had diabetes. And that was really difficult because it isn't as common as you would think. My pediatrician said that they only had 3 other patients with diabetes in their practice. So we were excited when we discovered that there was a club, a pen pal club for worldwide, children with diabetes. And so we set him up with a pen pal in Croatia, who was also type 1 diabetic. And that was a wonderful connection. And it was just really exciting to see Artur write those letters and to receive them and to build that connection with his pen pal. And so you also have to take care of yourself as a family. Oops, I just wanted to show, I'm going to interrupt myself for a moment and let you know that these 3 slides are available and hot linked on the s'more as well. So if you'd like to take a look at his presentation. I did want to say that as a family, it's really important that you spend some time finding out who you can connect with and what kinds of supports are out there, even if you choose not to reach out in the beginning. And I did want to mention that the Beyond the Type 1 platform is a wonderful place to start. And you will see that hot linked on the s'more as well. And they provide several websites and communities that are based in several languages, because so much of the information out there, of course, is in English. It's important to lift up those organizations that have made such an effort to pull their resources and expand outwards. So Arabic, French, Italian, German, Spanish, there are so many Beyond the Type 1 support communities out there. So if you know families that are looking for a way to connect, that's a great place to start. And I also want to take a moment to lift up the Juicebox podcast, because it also is a great support network. And although I'm not active on Facebook, there is a blog and a Facebook network that a lot of people find connections with. And there are worldwide, I believe, there are 40,000 members to that forum as we speak. So those are just a couple of things that you can do to really build your own identity as a member of a type 1 family and to lift up your child's identity. But you also have to be pragmatic. And so it's really important that you take some time to define all of those differences. And it's very likely that when a child goes back to school, they will have documented accommodations and an individual education plan that will support them. Since many life-changing health conditions, including type 1 diabetes, are technically, of course, a disability. That's something that you can expect, and it's there to empower and support your child as a learner. In addition, I would highly recommend that you also create some kind of a visual guide that's really accessible. So if there is a cover teacher in the classroom, or you have a babysitter, or your child starts a new dance class, you have a very easily accessible guide to these 4 categories so that everyone knows what to expect. And it's great to co-construct this with your child or with your learner. So one of the big differences is that Artur has to carry around a bag all the time. And so everyone knows it's his type 1 bag. But of course, it's good for everyone to be able to see all that's inside of it. And so one day we took everything out and we took a picture to make sure that he knew everything that was in the bag. And then anyone else, whether it's someone in his class or a babysitter or his basketball coach, everyone could understand the importance of the contents and what should be inside. And naturally, there is a very important medication in there called glucagon that always needs to be on hand for type 1 diabetics in case they lose consciousness because of a low blood sugar incident. So that is front and center at the top of the list. People are often very hesitant and confused about medications in general, but also meals and routines. So one thing that we included in our slide deck was that he is naturally always allowed to say yes to foods. We always thought that my husband and I, that people who were type 1 diabetic were not allowed to eat sugar. But that's not true. If insulin is given beforehand and it's done in a mindful way and the portions are reasonable, it's definitely can be a treat and a part of their diet. Not huge amounts, but certainly it should be manageable. And we always want Artur to feel like he is enjoying a social occasion that involves food. So we made that really clear and what had to happen as far as making sure that he had, appropriate insulin. And I also placed a little plastic box in his backpack so that he could also make the choice, if it wasn't possible for him to have an injection, to bring it home and enjoy the cupcake or the cookie later. And these are the types of things that it was really important for us to get down on paper so that we also were very clear about it and could communicate about it in a way that was, accessible to everyone. So we naturally translated all of this as well into German so that, our babysitters and his coaches could also understand what to expect and feel much more comfortable about asking follow-up questions as well. So I highly recommend this only as an exercise. And one way that you can involve your child or a learner in this process is to create these defining differences slides. And then I would ask Artur to come in and let me know if I forgot anything. Did I miss anything? Can you help me? Only you really know because of course, it's all about him. And so he really became more involved at the end because there were many, many weeks in the beginning when he did not want to talk about type 1 diabetes. And that was understandable. So he was able to participate in a way that felt good and felt manageable to him. And last, but certainly not least, I would like to spend some time talking about fostering an advocacy mindset. But before we move on, I just want to make sure that everyone who is attending, first of all, thank you so much for being here. And if you would like to open up your mics to ask any questions or wonderings that are coming to mind, please do so right now. I welcome it. And welcome, Chris. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Beth. Thank you so much. This is absolutely fascinating and so helpful to have your story explore a particular approach towards being able to support, in your case, Artur, but in other cases, children in our schools and in our care. And you mentioned a little bit earlier on about your other son. Yes. And I'd just be interested in it, as you're exploring the new identity or the developing identity of Artur, how you continue to do that with your other son.
Thank you so much for bringing up my other son, and his name is Hugo. And they're very, very close. They're 18 months apart. And what we saw with Hugo during Artur's stay was that he developed a lot of anxiousness and worry. And that because of the age difference, that some of the things that we were explaining to Artur could understand. And we were making the faulty assumption that Hugo, who was of course 2 years younger, could also understand what we were talking about. So we had, shared family conversations where we weren't doing a very good job in the beginning of making sure that the language and the phrasing that we were using was appropriate for Hugo. So he felt oftentimes overwhelmed and he didn't know how to ask the right kinds of questions. And so that was something that in hindsight, we were able to correct this. We started to realize, wow, he's out of the loop and he's very anxious. We started to correct it, but if I could do it all over again, I would have slowed myself down, my husband as well, and we would have taken more time to take more walks with Artur, and to take more walks with Hugo, and to allow them to have their separate spaces as well. We were so focused on unifying our family with our new identity that we didn't necessarily balance out Hugo's emotional needs very well in the beginning. As time went on, what we also noticed was that Hugo did adjust, and he felt a sense of pride because we would give him small jobs and choices. So one of his jobs would be to count down every time we gave Artur an insulin injection. You're supposed to count to 10 to make sure that all of the insulin gets into your body. And so Hugo was really excited when he could take over that job. He wanted to. And there were other small jobs that we gave him choices about taking on that he felt really part of the group, and he was just so kind in that way. And he's a very caring, empathetic child. So that was good, but we also didn't want him to feel as if his role was to always be a helper. So of course you have to keep it age appropriate and not overemphasized. The other thing that we noticed is that Hugo became uncomfortable with eating special foods around Artur, and that there were a couple of places he would go where he would eat something special. I'm going to just say cupcake. It could have been anything that was, a carbohydrate bomb. And he would feel really nervous about sharing that. And so we had to make a rule that we would never, in our family, food will never be a secret. And so we talked about that over and over to make sure that Artur knew that and Hugo knew that. And we stick by it as adults as well, so that there is never the temptation by grandparents or babysitters or anyone else to simplify life by giving Hugo a treat and telling him to stay quiet about it, and then not going through the complications of administering insulin to Artur and then checking to make sure that the dose is correct, etc. Because snacking is not a breeze when you have type 1 diabetes. So those were a few things that we did take into consideration over time for Hugo. And they crept up on us. So I hope that people benefit from these reflections after the fact. And then we also really worked to empower him through all of this trial and error for different activities. And he developed a passion for breakdancing through it, which was so exciting to see. So, and they both support each other in their passions now. And so we are so happy that he has his own individual passion that complements Artur's as well. So it worked out well. I would say just being really intentional about making sure that they're developing their identity beyond just something they enjoy, but something they feel compelled to do. And certainly breakdancing for Hugo is a means of personal expression. And I've got plenty of videos as a proud mom to prove it. So thank you so much for that question, Sarah.
Thank you, Beth.
All right. So I wanted, for any of you who are joining us, I just wanted to say welcome and thank you so much for being here. I'm Beth Stark, and I have spent 16 years as a secondary school learning support coordinator at an IB international school. I'm also the mother of 2 boys, and my oldest boy, Artur, was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes a little over a year ago. And so we're talking about the different dimensions of supporting children who have received a life-changing diagnosis. And the third dimension that I want to dive into together is fostering an advocacy mindset. And this has been a huge emphasis in my professional life as a learning support coordinator, and like so many of you out there, as a learner advocate. But all of a sudden, overnight, I was faced with a new set of challenges when it came to fostering an advocacy mindset in my son. So I want to start by talking about these 3 questions that we looked at, chewed on, talked about, and revisited over and over from the beginning. And one of the first challenges was how unbelievably huge the learning gap was, and how little our family knew about type 1 diabetes. So thinking about the first question for Artur just set his mind ablaze, and for good reason, because the only reason that he was diagnosed was because, honestly, I just had an inkling that there was something wrong. But unfortunately, that's not the case with many people and many children who have type 1 diabetes. About half of the children who do receive a proper diagnosis are already quite sick and in a state of what is called ketoacidosis. So they are oftentimes suffering from wasting, and it is affecting their organs. And it can lead to organ failure and even death. And so we were lucky in the sense that he was tested and received proper care quickly. And that is because his symptoms were acute, and he would be considered an acute early onset type 1. There's another half out there whose symptoms are much more subtle and span across a longer length of time. Scientists don't know why or who or what it means to have a disposition for type 1 diabetes. They believe that there is a genetic component because you have such an increased risk of having diabetes if you have a family member who has diabetes. So they know that there is a genetic correlation, but they also know that it can oftentimes happen out of the blue, and that there is quite often a correlation or a trigger post-virus. And so that's what happened to Artur. He was 10 days out of quarantine post-COVID when he was diagnosed. So it was triggered by COVID, most likely. If I could, and if Artur could let everyone know about the signs and symptoms, he would certainly be much happier. And I can see that, when it comes to developing an advocacy mindset, it's not about planting ideas in the minds of young people and learners. It's about the questions that we're asking them. And the broader and more open-ended those questions are, and the more we lean in and listen to what they have to say, the more that they can develop their own self-determination in how they want to change the world. And so awareness of symptoms of type 1 diabetes is something that, and raising awareness is something that Artur is really passionate about, and I share that passion. And so he's very excited that I'll be able to share those symptoms with you. If you go to the SMORE website that we have shared also in the chat, you will see, if you scroll down, you'll see a very simple one-pager of the 4 T's, which are the most common 4 symptoms of type 1 diabetes. Artur had all 4 T's. So he would definitely fit that, that checklist. But it's very important to know that there are many children who don't fit those 4 T's. And so underneath that 4T one-pager, you're going to see a link that will give you a more detailed description of the symptoms based on the age of the child. So whether your child or the child or children that you have in mind are toddlers or teenagers, it's important to be able to differentiate and dive a little bit more deeply into those potential symptoms. So I just want to emphasize that when it comes to fostering an advocacy mindset, it's less about the shoulds and it's more about the questions. So we admittedly did not have a lot of conversations in our family about this idea of being a change agent. We talked a lot about it in terms of the environment and being a steward, an environmental steward, the importance of conservation, but we did not necessarily talk about what it meant to be an advocate and a change agent. Right now, Artur is 9 years old, but we don't want him to be limited by his age. And we want to encourage everyone that's listening, if you are caring for learners or children in your life that have an interest in looking at medical care through the lens of human rights and the Sustainable Development Goal number 3, I want to encourage you to hop on this link and look at these really wonderfully scaffolded options for becoming a global advocate for, really building up more medical options for people worldwide to ensure that all children have access to insulin and the medical equipment that's needed to administer insulin. In addition, testing your blood and monitoring your glucose, these things only happen with equipment, and that equipment naturally is covered in Germany, where we live, through our insurance. But that's not the case in other places. So raising Artur's awareness of these facts and really leading him to the right kind of resources has really sparked his interest, but we're not pushing him to take action in the moment in any direction that he doesn't feel ready for, but it's an ongoing conversation of how can you, not do you want to be a change agent, but what are some ways that you can be an agent of change? Because we see this as a core issue that our family is very much committed to. And before we close out my time of sharing about our family's journey, I want to share something that we were so excited to see develop when it comes to fostering that advocacy mindset. We talk a lot about wants and needs in our family. And we talk about what everyone needs, access to food, water, shelter, belonging, and care and connection to others. And in addition, for Artur, he needs insulin. That is now a basic need. And we are so grateful, and we talk about being grateful for access to insulin quite often. 100 years ago, type 1 diabetes was a fatal disease. Insulin has only been used to support, extending the life of someone with type 1 and turning it into a condition instead of a fatal disease for 100 years since 1921. And, we talk about, the options for advocacy, and we have chosen to focus our efforts and our attention to sustainable solutions through donations to Life for a Child. A lot of people talk to us about a cure, a cure for type 1. And most of the emphasis in the world of type 1 diabetes is about raising money to support a cure for diabetes. Because we're so intent on fostering an advocacy mindset for our children, when we talk about injustice, we are very clear that having type 1 diabetes is not an injustice. It is a challenge that we didn't choose. And today in 2023, with the equipment and resources and medicine that we know we will have access to, there is no reason that medicine is telling us that Artur's life or condition of life should deteriorate or shorten over time. This wasn't true 30 years ago, but right now, as we speak, if we manage his disease well, he will live a full and somewhat healthy life. The injustice is that not every child has access to that in this world. And so we work to define the idea of need and want, and that he has everything he needs. And that there are many people out there that don't have access to insulin for their children. And we want to support this organization, Life for a Child, not because they are flying in with their capes as heroes for children with type 1 diabetes everywhere, but instead they're working to create sustainable solutions at the local level in many countries to ensure that children with type 1 diabetes are getting sustainable care and access to insulin on the daily. So I'm happy to say that Artur turned 9 last month. And if anyone's thrown a birthday party for a 9-year-old, you get a whole bunch of emails and text messages from caring parents wanting to know, what does Artur want for his birthday? And so my husband and I, turned to him and said, what do you want? They want to know, what do you want for your birthday? And without hesitation, he said, well, I have everything that I need. And I can't think of anything I want. And so Artur chose to go to school and ask all of his friends that he had invited to the party. We made a flyer and to donate to Life for a Child. And he had a bountiful birthday without any present opening, because the biggest present was that every single child's family donated to Life for a Child. And when I saw the look on his face and how proud and excited he was to make a difference for someone else, I knew we were on the right track. So thank you so much for listening to our journey and for being so enthusiastic and positive. I hope that the resources that I have curated on this make it to more caregivers who are connected to learners everywhere in the world of international education. I believe that these 3 dimensions of supporting children who have been diagnosed with a life-changing health condition can also apply to children, in other circumstances who don't have a diagnosis of type 1, but maybe something else. And I want to once again thank ECIS for this opportunity to share and to also model advocacy for my son, which was one of the biggest gifts of this hour with you today. And we have just a few minutes, and I want to make sure that if you do have a question, that you please feel free to open up your mics, and please feel free to
Thank
share.
you. Thank you so much. Can I, as people are putting into their questions in the chat box, I want to share my feelings right now for your wonderful presentation, because this is a different one, and is a different one for us because we hear an experience from a parent who has been resilient in an adverse moment to collect themselves, to organize their experience and to present it to us. And I think for me, at least, it's a first that I'm sitting through a webinar where you organize your emotional experience in a cognitive way for us. So it's thank you so much for this. You surely offering a lot of resources to parents, and because no one is immune to changes in lives, I think your model is very, very useful for anything that might happen to us. So thank you.
Well, it wouldn't have been possible without your support. So I really thank you for sharing the ECIS platform and allowing me to reach more members of your community. And it's really been a wonderful hour. And I do hope that the s'more lives on. You know, please share it with other people. And if there's anyone else that has any comments or questions, I would love to end with the voice of a participant. So please feel free to open up your mic if you have any questions. Hi, Nadia. It's good to see you.
I would really like to thank you for giving us options how to approach children and their parents in this first moment of transition with the diagnosis. What's the best way to help them? What questions to ask that are really meaningful and helpful instead of creating more confusion to children and families? Because oftentimes we as teachers or as friends want to help, but just don't know how, and sometimes can just make it worse. So thank you for really clarifying what works in those circumstances, that we can truly be helpful.
Well, I want to take a moment right now just to thank you. This is one of my beloved coworkers who hit the mark as soon as I came and shared the diagnosis for our tour. And I appreciate your support then, Nadia, and I appreciate it now. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Beth. You've been always a role model to us.
I miss you. I think that's a nice way to end, and I really appreciate you being here. So thank you so much, everyone who has spent the time with us today. And I want to thank you so much, Eleni, for doing such a fabulous job of co-hosting and facilitating. And please, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach me via the contact button on the s'more. You know, I'm more than happy to also connect with parents who have just recently received a diagnosis. I've certainly been there, and I'm more than happy to chat with anyone and everyone if it's going to improve the journey that so many families didn't choose to be on, but that they can certainly rise above and make the best of. You know, it's the challenge we didn't choose.
Absolutely, Beth, and thank you so much from our committee. I think I speak for everyone when I say that you have been very, very helpful in not only with your UDL suggestions and presentations, but also today for your experience, as we said, your resilience, your perseverance, and you're teaching us how to deal with crises. And you know, I'm Greek, so crisis in Greek means decision. So it's very interesting because you took a decision to go through that and you organize yourselves. It's wonderful, wonderful to see. And crises are in our life. It's integral part of our life. So it's wonderful to have your model. I don't know, Sarah, whether we can have this online for parents and for teachers to access this wonderful webinar. Would that be possible, do you think?
Yeah, I think we can certainly talk about it. It's been recorded, and you know, that's a decision that you as a committee will make.
Yes, of course. Yeah, of course.
from
It's a
ECIS
different one. It's wonderful, actually. It's a wonderful.
ECIS point of view, there wouldn't be an issue with that at all. And I think it's just a really valuable resource for many people. I've just put in the chat. Yes, for families, Beth, but also for practitioners in schools, for educators and for classmates.
Yeah.
There's so much information that you've given there about empathy and compassion and learning about one another, and what we sometimes think is some support, and find out that unintentionally it's been increasing emotional perhaps fear or anxieties. And so so you're going the journey with us helps everybody to be able to grow our capacity as listeners, as learners, and yes, as advocates and as allies. So thank you.
Oh, that just warms my heart. Yeah, we all live and learn, and there were so many things I would have never anticipated and learned along the way. And I was so grateful to be able to share with everyone. And the journey continues, definitely. There's so much that I still need to learn about the best way to care for him throughout his stages of life. But we'll get there. That's what we know. And we will continue to support Life for a Child, because they're building sustainable solutions to what is a true injustice, which is the thought of having a child and not being able to have enough insulin for them to lead a healthy life. And so I encourage everyone, if you're thinking about a way to give back and to an organization that is not doing for, but doing with communities, please consider Life for a Child. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you so much for today. Thank you.